Good morning. My name is Ralph Kelly, and welcome to Stay Kind Conversations. We have here this morning Allison Langdon. Ali, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Ralph.
And also Kathy Kelly. So it's fantastic to have you both in the studio this morning. And if you weren't with us last week when Ali interviewed Shura Pitt, we've known Ali. Kathy and I have known Ali in about 2.5 weeks' time. Known Ali for 10 years. And have been very close to her over those years and developed a very good personal relationship. The reason why we met Ali is she was with 60 Minutes in those days, and our son Thomas was hitting King's Cross on the 7th of July, and his life support was turned off 2 days later. And we sat down with Ali on 60 Minutes as the police asked us to do some media so they could help find his attacker. Anyway, it's so nice to have you here, Ali, this morning. Thank you for coming, and I'll just hand over to you to ask Kathy lots of good, interesting questions.
Oh, I've got lots to ask, Kathy. Nice to see everybody, and nice to see you again, Kathy. I always say that you and Ralph are the two people. I wish I'd never met you in my life, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I wish I'd never met you, because I know that if that was the case, then your life these past 10 years would be incredibly different. And we're sitting here, as you say, it's 2.5 weeks' time. It will be 10 years, which means 10 years since you lost your beautiful boy, Thomas. And, of course, it was also the month of July where you lost Stuart. Mm. So I guess that explains why July, when we do Stay Kind. Talk to me about how you feel during this month.
I think that July is always particularly sad, as is January, because both boys were born in January. And I guess if you ask anybody that's lost a child, that they will often say the same thing. It's really interesting that every day is always tinged with that little bit of sadness because they're not with you anymore. But there's just something about special occasions, and not that you really refer to an anniversary of their death as a special occasion, but something important like that day. It just hits home that little bit harder each time. And particularly this year, because on the 9th of July, it'll be 10 years since we lost Thomas. And it's really quite unfathomable how fast that time has gone. Yet in some respects, it just seems like a lifetime since I've seen him. So it's always tinged with sadness.
Mm. And I think, can I ask what then the importance of turning what is a month of great grief for both of you, and for Maddie, your daughter, your beautiful daughter Maddie, and with Stuart. So it was 4 years after Thomas, wasn't it, that you lost 4. Stuart?
Yes.
And he was the 25th of July.
That's right. Yeah.
So this month, which is, I imagine, one of the hardest, if not the hardest, that you have, that ability of you and Ralph to and this is what has amazed me about both of you, to turn this into something. To turn this into, for a power for good, and which is what Stay Kind is. And it's TK, take care, Stay Kind, Stuart Kelly. Why is that message so important this month?
Look, I think we both have the same agenda. We wanted people to remember the boys, and I think there was a lot of controversy and a lot of media around the time that Thomas was killed. And I think that, of course, for me, it was about, carrying on their legacy, remembering who they were, that they were good boys from a good family who both lost their lives for really no particular reason. And I guess kindness, we changed the name from the Thomas Kelly Youth Foundation to Stay Kind after we lost Stuart, not just because we'd lost another son, but I think we got to the point in our lives where we could see that every time something happened that was similar to what had happened to Thomas, that Thomas's name would come up in the media all the time. And we knew that even when Stuart was alive, we knew that each time that happened, there was some kind of repercussion on the family, but particularly our other 2 children when Stuart was still with us, and Maddie still is. I think, for that reason alone, we wanted to bring some safety back into the family, stop having Thomas's name out there. And so it was my suggestion to the board at the time that we rebrand the foundation. And we'd already started, at that time, we'd started the other underlying platform, which was Stay Kind, to bring Stuart's, and it sounds like I'm going around in circles here, but we wanted to take Thomas's name out. But at that point, we'd already brought Stuart's name in by using his initials for that other platform. And I guess at that time, when we lost Stuart, the whole dimension of the foundation started to change. Look, we had our safe space, we had people going out on the street and protecting our young and vulnerable people around those things that affect them on the streets, whether it's been intoxication or drugs or self-harm. And that was still going, but we wanted to get away from all the controversy that really probably surrounded and brought upon some aspects of why Stuart took his life around the lockout laws, and get away from that whole alcohol side of things and start to think about how we could really bring the foundation into the forefront by working towards something that was just really something that everybody could do. It wasn't about the alcohol, and it wasn't about all of that anymore. It was really about starting to create a movement around people, each and every one of us being able to do something that made a difference to lives, whether it was respecting people more, no bullying, all the things that are associated with things that aren't kind. So I know that Ralph did an interview with Hugh Mackay the other morning, and Hugh had said that we are naturally really kind people. Humans are kind people, but what's changed in our life is the busyness and the social media, and we're always rushing from here to there, and things go wrong, like cars cut us off, or something goes wrong when you just need that little bit of extra time, and then we become anxious and lose our tolerance, and that's when we start to stop being kind. So,
and I think that point you made, and Terry and I touched on it last week as well, that I think people are inherently kind. But I was also thinking about then post out my chat with Terry last week, and I think this is something that social media has then allowed. We can be incredibly unkind, and I know that. I mean, having met you and Ralph and Maddie and Stuart only days after you'd lost Thomas, and being in your home at a time where just I couldn't get my head around the grief, and that idea of, you go to bed at night and you get a phone call that your boy, who's, out on his first night out in King's Cross, has just arrived, that something so horrific has happened. It's hard to get your head around sort of all of that, and then how you guys turned that into something like, okay, we don't want anyone else to go through this. We're going to raise this, and you became pioneers, or you really pushed for reform. But that made you a target. And I remember Stuart Kelly speaking at a big gala night that I was involved in, and it brought tears to everybody's eyes, and just talking about what alcohol is doing to our society, and how that moment where this young boy showed such great courage and conviction, how that was able to be turned into something and used against him, that ended up having like the most horrific consequences that you can't come back from.
Yes, I guess if we could have our time over, you like to think that you've made the right decisions in life, particularly when it comes to your children. But I guess if, I could turn the clocks back, I would not have let him speak outside the court. I wouldn't have allowed him to speak at that dinner, because it did have repercussions on him. It had those bloggers out there that were saying he was a puppet, that he was a political puppet, and that we were feeding information to him on what to say.
I find that, I'm sure, I've just seen people not in the room here now, like how horrible that is, that you regret that he went out and did that, where he, which I think just showed the type of person that he was. Like, he was extraordinary. And
we couldn't have been more proud of him that evening when he got up and spoke. And I know he sat down with Ralph and they prepared what he was going to say together, because Stuart was not a speechwriter. He said English wasn't one of his great subjects. He hated getting up whenever he had to present at school and actually using his voice in front of his peers. But, he wanted to do that. And he was the type of boy that you could never, ever tell him what to do. I remember he had a bit of a falling out with a little mate after going from primary school to high school, and, you know, he went off to King's as a boarder, and I guess, you know, you all sort of stick with your group. You don't really associate with the boys that go off to the other schools. And there was this particular boy that he'd been great friends with, and I remember I was good friends with his mum, still am, and, you know, I'd try and sort of get them back together by saying, oh, Karen's coming over for coffee today, and, you know, Spencer might come too, or whatever. And, you know, he'd just take off out the back garden and you wouldn't see him for the next few hours. You couldn't make him sit down and be with somebody or do something that he didn't want to do in his life. So to get up there and present that night, and with such compassion and feeling of how it had affected him, made us really proud. And I think, you know, the nation got behind him. Generally, that kindness was there amongst the majority of people that heard it. But it just takes a few to write something, and then, you know, it gets shared on social media, that then the nasty people get involved, the people that don't have anything better in their life, or they're suffering themselves, so their way of dealing with that is to lash out at other people. That can, you know, ultimately change the course of his life and our life, because I don't think, had all of that gone on, you know, that he may have made the decision that he did.
And I don't think even at our age that when that happens, how, you know, do we have the ability to process that clearly and be able to segment that and go, that's that, and that's not my problem, that's their problem. When you're an 18-year-old boy, you've just started at college, and, you know, we know what that environment is like and what a heavy drinking culture that is. And when you've come out and sort of set yourself up as this person who said, hang on, we've got a problem with this, how that makes you a target. I don't know how you deal with that when you with the tools you've got at 18.
And I remember once that Madeline and Stuart both said to me that, you know, what happened to Thomas had not only, you know, changed their lives, but it also changed their thought process around getting older and being able to go out and drink. It didn't mean that they didn't, you know, but they, well, certainly Stuart didn't have much opportunity because he died at 18 as well, but, you know, he probably had the odd beer with a few mates at school towards the end or after school had finished, and, you know, it was very limited. He wasn't the sort of boy that wanted to just go out when he was actually legally 18 and just get himself plastered. And I think Madeline was the same. It definitely changed their thought process and about, you know, what alcohol meant to them and how they wanted to treat it and what they could see, you know, that I guess they saw it at an earlier age than maybe what some kids do.
And it's a shame too that they had to see that and they've had to go through all of that. How are you these days?
I'm much the same, you know. It's still, I think when you talk about these things, it still, you know, affects you every day. You know, I think I'm a pretty vulnerable person, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, and, you know, I try to live my life with happiness and joy. You know, what's the point in life if you don't have that? And I surround myself in that. Yeah, it's such a simple question, and it just, you know, cuts to the core, because you realise that you're not really living the life that you intended to live. And, you know, I'm lucky we're still together, and it hasn't been easy by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't want to play the victim, because that's just not what I want to be. I want to be like other people. I want people to treat me like everybody else. But it is hard, you know.
And what you and Ralph have been through would break a lot of people. How, and I know you've touched on it not being easy, but to have, you know, to go through and to lose two sons. How do you get through that? Because I think everyone deals with grief differently. And I think you're a far more open person in some regards, where you want to talk about things a lot more. And I think it's fair to say that Ralph's probably a little bit more guarded and or just okay, right, there's a job to be done and focus on this, as opposed to sort of looking back here sometimes. And I could be wrong on that, but How do you navigate that when you perhaps process grief differently?
Look, I think it's a really difficult journey, and I guess because I'm so open, I have met a lot of other people, and we've met a lot of other people together that have had that loss, and might have been different circumstances, and whilst in one way that's really tragic to meet other people like that, and as you touched on when you opened the interview, the same with you, like, yes, I'd love to not have met any of these people, but it's also been a blessing because we've been shown such enormous kindness from people and become friends with people like yourself and other people that we've met in the media and, the medical field and the police force. It's just been extraordinary, and we regard those people as our friends. But, I think for me, sharing and talking about what we went through when the time is right. I don't do it with everybody. Obviously, if I'm out and, we went to a party a few weeks ago, it was the 60th birthday, and, when you just start talking to somebody, they always ask you, and, where you live and what do you do and how many, do you have children? How many children? What do they do? And, those are the times that I don't feel comfortable, because I don't really want to go into anything with people that I won't see again. And I generally don't. But I always try to acknowledge that I have 3 children. And then sometimes the questions get tricky because they ask what they do. And I focus in on our daughter. And sometimes I try to run away after that.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's really hard. But I think for me it's been about sharing with people that I feel comfortable with, people that I know that I'm going to continue some kind of association with. It's better to get it out in the open really quickly than it is to let it dwindle and sort of come into the relationship later on, because then sometimes they feel mortified and I feel more worried about their feelings than I do about my own, and then I feel like I'm actually wanting to wrap my arms around them and stop and console them for their sadness for me than deal with myself.
That's I hadn't really thought of that, because that's just one of those questions, isn't it, that pops up sort of straight away when you're meeting new people and that kind of thing. That is one of the first questions that you ask. I'm mindful of asking it for a whole bunch of different reasons, in just having mates I know who've had great difficulty or are unable to have children, say.
Yeah.
And so I'm really mindful of I don't ask that. I don't ever ask people question about kids. You kind of hope that they'll sort of give you some indication of what's going on, and they can lead that question, because I know I've spoken to so many girlfriends over the years where it's a little bit like what you're saying when you're at a party and it's a really innocent question, do you have kids? And that is just, it's brutal. It can be really brutal. And that's what I guess you talk about when you just, those moments can really surprise you.
Yeah, and look, as you say, they're just normal, everyday questions, and they're asked with such innocence and general, caring about what that person has in their life. And it's just difficult. And normally I don't break down and get emotional like I did when you first asked that question earlier, but just every now and then, as I think we've said over the years, it just sits there below the surface, and it can take somebody that you really care for a great deal and you've known a long time to ask you something, and it just all of a sudden it all bubbles up and comes out of nowhere, and you can't turn it off. And other times, you can just manage it. So yeah.
I even have so Kathy was one of I've got a little boy who's 5 and a little girl who's 3, and Kathy was one of the first people that I told I was pregnant with Mac. And you're one of the first people to ever meet my little boy. And I remember having that moment going over to your house, and I was so excited to see you guys. You're in Lane Cove then, and introducing you to Mac. But I also then remember having this moment of thinking, does this bring up stuff for you when it comes to, down the track and grandkids and things? And I know I bring this up because we were talking earlier, one of your best friends now is, got kids and grandkids, and how that is sometimes hard for you.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult not to make comparisons. And I remember in the early days, particularly when we just lost Thomas, we might go out and have a coffee, and you'd see some little fella playing over there near the table near there, and immediately you look for things that look like him at that age. now I find, I don't know whether it's just the fact that I'm getting old and I feel like I'm sort of past it now, but I look at all the young men today out on the street like some perverted old woman that they're all so handsome. They're all really gorgeous. They've all got, you know, the bit of a beard thing happening and nice sort of trendy dresses and things like that. And I think I just see the boys all the time. It's really hard not to look at that and say, well, where would they be and what would they be doing now? And, you know, they were very different as young boys, and I guess we always had, you know, more concern about Tom because he was the eldest and the least assured, whereas Stuart was, you know, had this persona that was really outgoing and, you know, had loads of friends. So I suppose, you know, I often think about, well, I wonder what Thomas would be doing now. He'd be 28 and a half and, you know, I'm sure he'd probably at least be in a relationship. Maybe he would have been one of those young men that would have just fallen in love with the first girl and got married really young and even had babies by now. So, yeah, all of those things. And as you mentioned, a girlfriend of mine, I've met a couple of lovely girls since we've moved down to the South Coast, and one of them, you know, I get on well with both of them, and we don't sort of see each other together, the three of us, much, but I met them both through our dogs, actually, which was really, really nice. And this one girl, she's got 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, exactly the same. Their daughter's in the middle. The 2 eldest are married. They've both got 2 children each. And I often look at her life and I don't begrudge her what she has, but I often think, how did your life get to be so perfect? And I've lost 2 of my 3 children, and we don't have those grandchildren. And that's really, that's sad. It's hard to reflect on that. But, and she's cautious, she's conscious of that as well. A couple of times she's said things to me and I said, no, don't ever feel sad for what you've got for what I haven't got, because I'm just so happy that you've got that. So, yeah.
Oh, well, and we'll just put the pressure on Maddie, by the way, because she's engaged, get married soon. Poor Maddie. We've got a few questions coming through. This is an interesting one. Who is your kindness inspiration?
I probably should say Ralph because, you know, he runs...
You can choose more than one person.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm in awe of what he's achieved with the foundation. And we go out places now and, you know, he's thanking everybody. And sometimes I kind of, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you're really a bit over the top there. But then I kind of think, well, really, you're just not getting up there with the kindness, Kathy. You need to follow suit here. So, look, I think that's incredible. As far as my inspiration goes, I don't know, I think I'm just inspired by people around me that I see that are decent human beings. I recently, I said we moved to the South Coast almost 2 years ago. And during that time, of course, we've had, you know, lockdowns for extended periods of time in Sydney, which are then reflected down to our area as well. But even when we weren't in lockdown, just being in an area like that, it's a small community and a lot of tourism. And so it's really hard to get involved in the community and, you know, join various things. So recently, this year, I decided to join a choir because I used to love to sing with my sister.
I didn't know this.
And it's been a long time and I haven't got much of a voice left because I spent a lot of years screaming at the children, so I kind of went. But,
Ralph.
but anyway, so we just had a concert last weekend and I very reluctantly went in it because I thought, how in God's creation am I going to stand up there on a stage without the words and the music to follow? I barely know it, but, you know, we sort of managed to get through it and I really enjoyed it. But as far as we meet once a week and it's an a cappella group, so it's all women. And so we basically just sing and we have a little break in the midst of the evening for a cup of tea. And I often find myself by myself. I feel it's not a very inclusive environment because a lot of these women have been singing together since it started 4 years ago. And I generally only sort of talk to 1 or 2 people that are in the same area as me singing. So I'm singing soprano too, and there's sometimes 4 parts. Anyway, I've said a few times, oh, look, I don't know if I want to keep doing this because I just don't feel like they include me. And I think a lot of that is really my own person personality as well, from what I've been through.
Do you think you put up a bit of a wall?
Yeah, I think I do. So occasionally I've been and I've thought to myself, oh, they're not even talking to me, I can't be bothered. So I just sit down and look at my messages on my phone. So I kind of cause it myself, I suppose.
It takes two to tango, as we're always told.
But anyway.
That is hard though too, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be really hard, and it has made me think about walking away. And then, you know, Ralph might be up in Sydney and we talk later that night when I come home, and I said, oh, I really enjoyed it tonight. It's really challenging, and I'm finding it really hard to keep into my part. I'm all over the place. One minute I'm singing soprano, then I'm doing the alternate, and the girl next to me is giving me the elbow because I'm on the wrong note. Anyway, cut a long story short, it was, I have felt, you know, in two minds. Do I keep going back because I don't feel included, or should I keep going because I'm really enjoying the challenge? Anyway, last week we went to do this concert in Kiama, and the night before we went, we got an email which had the placement of where we were all standing in our particular choir, because there was several people performing, and my name wasn't on the list. And so I sent the conductor an email thinking, oh, she probably won't see it. She's got so much to organise tomorrow. And I didn't hear back. And so that morning I was getting a little bit annoyed. So I sent her a text and she responded straight away. She said, oh, I'm so sorry. We'll sort it out later. Anyway, when I got there, everybody was sort of sitting in these chairs, a bit like here in the audience today, and they're all sitting where they were supposed to be sitting. So I had nowhere to sit because I didn't know, and I couldn't see her. And then I saw her in the distance and she was madly organising things. So I stood over by the wall, and the longer I stood there, the more upset I was getting. And one of the ladies, who is one of the only two people that I generally speak to during the break, she came over and she said, I'm not having this. And she dragged me over and she made a space, and the two of us sat on the chair together. And that's where I got up and performed on the stage, and the conductor never came to me. It was never addressed. Yeah. Everything went well. But just
that little moment of calm.
She knew, she could see that I looked completely, you know, uncomfortable, and she just included me. And I was so grateful for that. I just thought it was such a kind thing to do. She could have just left me there. The conductor would have come along. I would have eventually got up enough nerve to say, well, where do you want me to stand? And it was a big deal too, because, as I said, there's 3 and 4 parts in the song, and because I'm so new to it, it's really easy to join in the wrong key of what you're supposed to be singing. So I wanted to be surrounded by the people that were in my particular area of the tracks, and she just made sure of it. She made sure that I had one on each side of me, and I was really grateful for that.
I think is just a great example of something, I wouldn't even say that's small. I think that's actually a big thing which she did, but they can turn an experience. It could be one of, you know, a really difficult time for you and a really horrible experience into a really lovely experience, and something you can take away from it, and it'll probably keep you in the choir. So many questions are coming through for you, Kathy. This one's interesting. Do you find it difficult being so vulnerable in a public forum?
Not really. I think whenever I've been asked to speak at something, I say yes straight away. I think it's closer to the time that I get the most anxious, I think, as we all do. You know, you've got to get up and present something or whatever, and you think, oh, I'm going to really muck that up. So I'm always anxious, and I'm like school. It's last minute. I'm writing like a maniac, trying to get everything down that I want to get across to people. But I think the vulnerability in the public is what I'm really most passionate about, because I think that I know that what I can share can help somebody that's listening there, or somebody might pass on what I've said that just might make a little bit of a difference to that person. And so whilst I feel a little bit lost at times and a little bit alone at times, I feel like I communicate that vulnerability really well. And I think that it's just something that we all need, because I think to be inclusive or to exclude people, I think, is really easy. We don't mean to do it, the same way as we may not mean to be unkind. But when we actually include somebody because you just share something and then they feel that they might have that opportunity to have a voice, That's really important, because I think that's why so many people today, lock themselves away, become, unhealthy in their thoughts, may eventually even attempt to take their life, or may actually even succeed in taking their life. I think that comes from loneliness and not being included. And being made to feel that you're just like everybody else is so important. And I think that's why I'm not particularly fond of the term mental health. I know that we have a mind that needs looking after and we have a body that needs looking after, but I think that it's all part of the same person. And I think that the term mental health tends to make people feel like they're mental, there's something wrong with them, and that, they're not the same as everybody else.
But do you think that is shifting? Because I feel that has been the case, but I feel like with a lot of conversations we're having now, I feel like, and I'd put domestic violence and I'd put suicide in this sort of category of things that the more we talk about now and the more we, that we sort of take it away, that it's this sort of isolating thing, and that somehow, you go back to when I was kids and, talk about mental health, that suggested someone was crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't feel that we have that stigma around. I feel like a lot of people feel that they can openly talk about their struggles with, I know you don't, with their mental health.
Look, I think it's definitely getting better, and I think even in the time since we've lost Thomas, I think a lot of the conversations, particularly around the time that, Rosie Batty was made Australian of the Year and talking about domestic violence and becoming a public forum to talk about these things, I think it's definitely changing, and it's changing for the better. I still think that there is some issues around, particularly around social media, where, there is all this perfection expected, particularly with our young women today, our young girls at school. They must feel that they've got to look a certain way and be a certain level of thinness, and all of that I think is particularly hard on young people. And I think a lot of that comes from what we're trying to get across in social media, that, life's perfect. Look at this perfect holiday I went on, and look at this perfect meal that I just ate. Look how gorgeous it is, and all that sort of stuff. And it's not real. And I think that is one side, but I think that talking about things is totally going in the right direction. And I've always said, when I've presented to people, that I really feel that it's very important that we start talking to our children. It doesn't matter how little they are and how little they can understand. We need to talk about good things and bad things around the dinner table. We need to talk about death, and we need to talk about suicide. I'm not saying sitting down in front of your 3 and 5-year-old and talking about those things regularly, but those sorts of conversations need to be part of our our regular conversations with our family from the time children are in earshot and being able to understand, because it's part of life.
And I mean, I just even know with our 3 and 5-year-old, like, death at the moment is something that they just bring it up all the time. And I think that the other night, my husband was out, so it was 8:30 at night. So all I wanted to do was have a shower and go to bed, because I'm getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he just kept coming back in, and then just opened the door. It's 8:30. It's like, mate, I've got to go to bed. And it's like, Mummy, are you going to die before I'm an adult? And it was this this is a big conversation to have at, 8:30 at night with a little 5-year-old. But they, these, you're right, these are topics and these are things that they already think about and we need to talk about. But going back to, you talk about showing that vulnerability and what that question was about showing that vulnerability, I feel there is a great strength. Like, you have to be a strong person and Taria talked about this last week as well, because when I first met Taria, she was a hard nut to crack. Is probably, it was all just positive. And it's, it's like, hang on, you can't go through this and for there not to be all those dark times. And it took her many, many years to get to a point where she could address that. And it wasn't until that she felt strong that she could talk about her vulnerability. Do you feel strong?
I think that's a good question. I think sometimes I feel really strong in the sense that I'm still here and I've survived what we've been through, because there's been a lot of time, many times, that I didn't really want to be here anymore. You lose 2 children. Gosh, God, you kind of think, what's there to live for? But having another child who's still here and living, you know, the best life she can, God, how could I walk away from that? So I think I've got a definite level of strength there to be able to still be here and still functioning and still be able to get up and have a conversation like this. But there's times where I feel as weak as a kitten and I'd just like to crawl back into bed and stay there. But, you know, there's always a barking dog in the background, a cat crawling up the back of the blind in the bedroom that doesn't allow me to do that. So, yeah, I think, not that that's part of the question, but, you know, surround yourself by children and by pets because that gives you purpose. It makes you get up every day. It does give you responsibility. Yeah. And I think if you go back to what we spoke about with, you know, Stuart taking his life and, you know, the pressure that's on these kids, but I think the difference in somebody, say, of my age who has a family to even entertain that thought, there are things that probably have kept me going and stopped me wanting to even think about that, that a young person who can't see that there's a future tomorrow in front of them, you know, there's something good about getting older and having that responsibility and having family that keeps you focused that maybe some of our youth don't have today.
Do you think there's then been, and what I've found really amazing with you and Ralph, like you've got Maddie, and I imagine there's a part of you that's just like, no, I'm going to wrap you in cotton wool. You are not allowed to go anywhere. You're not allowed to leave our sight. You have allowed her to live her best life. You let her go to Europe and travel through Europe. And I can't imagine that was probably easy for both of you to let her go and do that. I watched this beautiful, beautiful young girl who, you know, I met 10 years ago. I still remember when she did work experience with me at Channel 9 and just like, you're a superstar, whatever you want to do in this world, you're going to, you know, you're going to change the world. And she is. But, you know, how much strength has it taken for you to allow her to spread her wings when you probably just wanted to keep her close? And how proud of her are you?
Look, I think initially we didn't want anybody to leave the front door. But she's very much like both of us. Gosh, all the things I like about myself I see in my daughter, and all the things that I don't like about Ralph I see in my daughter. And that sounds mean.
Oh, you
No, I look, the more I get to know her, we just spent a couple of days together last week because she was finishing up one job and starting a new job, and we hadn't spent any quality time together for a long time, certainly pre-last year's lockdowns. We saw her a couple of times last year because we're living on the south coast and she was in Sydney and it prevented us from doing that. So, look, I think she's an incredibly strong young woman, and I don't think any bolting the doors would have kept that child in. She had to go out and live her life, and I don't know, I think we made that decision very early that we couldn't wrap them up. They had to live their life, and they had to go through and make the occasional mistakes, which there has been a couple. You know, I've had a couple of phone calls in the middle of the night that we weren't so happy with her about, but overall she's a good kid or good, you know, a wonderful human being, and she has gone on and done things with her life that I don't think we could have ever imagined. And particularly when you consider that she was just about to start her trials for the HSC when Thomas was killed. I thought she'd just come home and stay there and go back to school the following year. And she just looked at me and said, Mum, well, what good is that going to do? I'm going to sit here and cry in my room for the next 6 months and then start this process all over again. She said, I've just got to give it a go. So off she went. And then I think she was in about second or third year of law when Stuart took his life. And she did say to us, you know, I'm just going to do one subject this semester. There's no way I could go back. But she went back and she did all 4 subjects and she did well. And, you know, I think the reason she's got up and she's fought so hard, and I'm sure it's been a challenge for her, is because she wants to make them proud. In the same way we're so proud of her.
I think she wants to make you proud too.
Yeah, and look, you know, there isn't a birthday card or anything that we ever give her that we don't put the boys' names on. And I always say, you know, I'm sure they're looking down and they're so proud of you, Maddie, you know. And yeah, she's a great kid. We couldn't have asked for more.
You, Ralph and Maddie, do so much and show so much kindness to so many other people. I love that you ensure that we have these conversations all the time. And a question's come through, which I think is a really beautiful one. What are the small ways that you stay kind to yourself?
Oh, look, I think staying kind to yourself is really important. And I think it's as important as staying kind to the people around us. It's so important because I don't think we give ourselves enough credit at any day of the week. What do I do to stay kind to myself?
Just the little things sometimes, isn't it? It's might be on one of those days when you're feeling lonely that you, or, you know, where you reach out to a friend and go and have a cup of tea or...
Yeah, look, as I said, I've got a couple of dogs. They keep me busy. And if I'm feeling a bit under the weather or whatever, I tend to go to this place on the south coast, Gerringong, which many of you may know of, and it has this magnificent headland and it looks down over the beach, over Werry Beach. And unless it's blowing a gale and you feel like you're going to get blown off the mountain, off the cliff face rather, it's a place that I always feel, it just lifts you up. You look out at that view and you feel renewed. And I think I like to do that for myself a few times a week. I mostly go to give the dogs a run off the lead, but I get something out of it as well, which is really lovely. And sometimes I just allow myself to have a day where I don't get much done. Ralph's in Sydney a lot during the week, so the dog hair builds up on the floor to a point that, you know, it's like a carpet going over the floorboards a lot of the time. And sometimes I think, oh yeah, I should do that. And then it's 9 o'clock at night. I think, nah, I'll do that tomorrow. I don't care. So I allow myself to, you know, I guess I've got the luxury that Ralph has been, you know, the only earner of money in our family since, as far as the two of us goes, and he's looked after me in that respect. And you know, I've tried to do a few little things after we lost Thomas, and I find that really hard. I find it really hard to reinvent myself, to try and go back and do something that might make me a little bit of income, because, you know, and I use every excuse under the sun to avoid it. I think a lot of it is the fact that, you know, I turned 60 last year, so I kind of feel like I'm too old to learn new tricks as well. But I think by doing that, it also allows me the time that I need to live my life the way I need to live it, to have those days where I feel lonely, to have those days where I enjoy my loneliness, to have those days where I can catch up with a girlfriend or take the dogs for a walk, and even just take myself out for a cup of coffee. And I do that often by myself, and I think it's just how I get by. So if that's being kind to myself, I suppose.
That's being kind. Doesn't have to be big gestures, does it? Do you ever think about what Thomas or Stuart might think in regards to what you and Ralph are doing with the foundation and starting these really important conversations and getting a movement going?
Oh, look, I think they would be incredibly proud of what's been achieved. I think in the early days I used to think they'd be sitting there saying, oh, for God's sake, Dad, what are you doing? But more so Stuart than Thomas, I suppose. I don't know. Look, I think if there is a way that they're looking down on us, how could they not be proud of what's been achieved? And I'm sure they'd liked the idea of letting their names go and, you know, and trying to live our lives for us rather than about what has been or what could have been. And, yeah, I hope that they're proud.
You think you have that balance where you're living your life and honouring their memory and doing the work that you're doing?
I'm not sure that we're quite there yet, you know. Interesting enough, I think people say that the longer you live with something, the easier it becomes. And I know that Ralph has touched on this in the past. I think it gets harder, much harder. And I think definitely there are many people that go through the loss of a child that don't survive, their marriage doesn't survive. And I think we've come pretty close to not surviving. In fact, we had a situation last year where we went away for a few days, and we kind of went away. We were looking forward to it, and when we got there, we were enjoying it to a point, but one evening we had a bit of a meltdown and a bit of an argument, and the next day Ralph's like his usual self, he gets up and he just puts it aside, whereas I kind of, got the hatchet out. I'm ready. I just want to talk it through, and he doesn't want to do that. So he said, let's go for coffee. I said, no, I don't want one. So he went off for a walk and he came back and he said, I haven't had that coffee yet, let's go for coffee. I've just had one, thanks, don't want one. And I just put myself to...
Ralph, she sounds so easy to live with.
So I kind of sat in bed and I read a book, which I never do, which was lovely to do on a holiday, and had a bit of a snooze. But anyway, it might have been that same day or the next day we back on track, everything was fine, just got to forget about it sooner or later. If he doesn't want to talk about it, I'm never going to talk him into it, so I just have to, roll with the punches. And we were just walking along this road and we saw these people at a distance stopping and taking a photo of these birds in this tree. And as they came close to us, when they finished their photography, Ralph said hello to them, which he does. As I said, he says hello and thanks everybody for everything they do in life, and that's a great thing. And anyway, we started talking to these people, and Ralph was sort of talking to one guy, his name was Tom, I was talking to Tim, and they were a couple, not that that really mattered, but anyway, they were talking about their lives, and he was a doctor in psychiatry, and the other chap had been in finance in film and so forth, and we just got chatting to them, and then I was kind of tuning into what Ralph and this guy were talking about, and then he was probably doing the same. And this fellow I was talking to said, we've got this foundation which is around, I can't remember, he said exactly what it was for to begin with, but he said, we really wanted to sort of get it off the ground, but it was all a bit slow happening, and it was all around Tim's work as a psychiatrist. And anyway, then the Kellys, do you remember that story about the Kellys? They lost their son in King's Cross. And I said, that's us.
Wow.
And then they realised, in the conversation we all sort of joined together. And within about 40 minutes of standing on the side of the road, we were all crying, hugging. It was all very, anyway, it was all very peculiar. But the foundation that they created was to help people with their grief who had lost a child. And it was all done where the philanthropic people that came into their lives, they paid for this extraordinary therapist to work with these people over a 16-week time period. And anyway, they didn't say you need this, or they didn't know what we thought about the night before or anything like that. But at the end of the conversation, they gave us a card each. And we went back to the little place we were staying in, and I said to Ralph, I kind of feel like Thomas or Stuart was sitting in that tree and said, "You go and help our parents. They really need help." Anyway, a bit of time passed and we reached out to them, and it was getting towards the end of last year. And so, of course, all of these psychoanalysts were taking time off over the Christmas period. So they only had one person that was prepared to start helping with us, and that there would probably be a break of about 5 or 6 weeks in between. And we kind of looked at each other and thought, well, this is going to be useless. We've probably got the worst possible person. They've just kind of dragged her out of nowhere. She's the only one that wants to do it. Anyway, we started the program, had this big break in the middle. I feel like she got us the moment we sat down with her. And over the 16 weeks, it went for a long period of time because of the breaks. I said to Ralph a few weeks after it finished, well, wouldn't she be proud of us now, sitting here having this conversation? It was Ralph's birthday and we went away for a couple of days, and he was chatting away more than he'd chatted to me, I think, in the last 5 years together, all over this dinner. And I said, well, wouldn't she be proud of us? And he said, yeah. And I said, I don't think we would have made it without that.
Wow.
And I kind of feel like that was the greatest gift of kindness of all, that maybe the boys were looking out for us. Maybe it was meant to be. I'm not really a great believer in meant to be's anymore. I used to be all through my life until we lost Thomas. And I kind of can't really ever come up with a reason that could have happened. Even with all the kindness movement, everything, all the wonderful people we've met, it still should never have happened. But I think that that was just incredible. It was such an incredible moment. And, you know, I think whilst we have a lot of work to do to find a deep connection again, I think that it's always been there, but we've kind of, I think what this woman allowed us to understand was our individuality and why we were so different. And a lot of that had stemmed from the childhoods that we'd had and how different they were. In many respects, we sort of were brought up in the sort of same socio-economic sort of families, but it was
things
different.
Very differently.
Yeah.
You know, as you said, like boarding school and how, you know, you're taught to sort of shut that down and what have you. But I love, and I mean, I love that, and there's so much power in you sharing that, how, you know, whether it's right place, right time, whatever that is. But as you just said, that the greatest act of kindness that you've seen that potentially changes both yours and Ralph's life. And look, I mean, I wish we could stay here and we could keep talking for, you know, all afternoon. But Kathy, I know that it's never easy to sit and talk about this, and it's not like this part is almost okay. It's when, you know, we all get up now and we'll go and we go back. You then, it stays with you because it's all at the front of your brain again. So, you know, it means you may not get another good night's sleep tonight. And but I think the importance and the, you know, the strength and power in your story, and I mean, you and Ralph are two of the most phenomenal people I've ever met. You're very strong, even though sometimes you don't think you are. And you're brave. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing everything that you have today.
Thank you for your time as well.
Kathy,
you make it so easy.
Thank you. That was all right, wasn't it?
Yeah. I do tend to waffle.
No, you don't.
Thank you.